What if the very part of yourself you've been hiding is the key to unlocking your destiny? Carl Jung didn't just believe this, he proved it. And today, you're about to find out how facing your shadow may reveal the deepest purpose of your life. We all want to live with purpose. We read books about it. We chase careers and relationships that promise it. We ask ourselves the big questions late at night. Why am I here? What is my calling? What is the point of all this? But what if we're looking in the wrong direction? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who pioneered analytical psychology, believed that your true life's purpose cannot be found in your achievements, but in your shadow. The shadow is not evil, it is not broken, it is not something to be erased. It is simply unacknowledged. It is everything you were taught to reject, fear, or disown. It's the anger you suppress, the envy you deny, the truth you run from. It's the voice in you that says, "This isn't who I am," and yet it is. Jung taught that we spend the first half of our lives constructing the persona, a carefully curated mask we wear to gain acceptance in the world. But in doing so, we exile entire parts of ourselves, our raw emotion, our intuition, our sexuality, our chaos, our wildness, our grief. We disarm what doesn't fit the narrative of who we think we should be. And the result? We feel hollow, disconnected, successful on the outside, but spiritually starving. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But the soul doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. It waits, it watches, and eventually it demands to be seen. The shadow is the soul knocking on the door, not to destroy you, but to integrate you, to show you who you are beneath the mask. And here's the wildest part. Your deepest purpose, the one that can't be replicated, bought, or copied, is not found in the light. It's buried in the dark. It lives in the very things you've been running from. So why don't we go there? Why do we avoid the shadow? Because it's painful. To face the shadow is to confront shame, guilt, fear, jealousy, insecurity, the emotions society tells us are bad or unproductive. We've been conditioned to perform, to be perfect, to be polished. But purpose is not a performance, it's a process. And that process begins with a descent into your own depths. In ancient mythologies, whether it's Anna's descent to the underworld, Orpheus seeking Eurydice, or Christ's descent before resurrection, there is always a journey downward before rebirth. Jung didn't just study this, he lived it. In what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, Jung experienced a psychological and spiritual crisis so intense, he thought he was losing his mind. But he wasn't. He was meeting his shadow. He was peeling away the layers of persona, success, and identity, and seeing what lived underneath. And in that darkness, he discovered gold. He began to understand that what we repress doesn't go away, it gains power. That what we avoid becomes our fate. That what we deny becomes the silent architect of our lives. If we don't make peace with our shadow, it will control us from the background. It will show up in our relationships, our addictions, our anger, our self-sabotage. Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So what does this mean for you? It means your pain is not random. Your wounds are not pointless. Your shame is not the end of your story. They are clues, markers, invitations to go deeper. Think about the times you felt most lost in life, times of heartbreak, betrayal, failure. What if those were not detours, but directions? What if the collapse was actually the beginning? The truth is, your shadow isn't here to haunt you. It's here to guide you. It holds your suppressed creativity, your unspoken truth, your repressed rage that could become righteous action, your grief that could open you to profound compassion. The parts of you you've been taught to fear might be the very parts that will set you free. But here's the twist. The shadow doesn't integrate itself. You have to meet it. You have to be willing to look where you've been unwilling to look, to ask questions that might terrify you, to sit in silence when distraction feels safer, to tell the truth even when it shakes your voice. Shadow work is not about fixing yourself. It's about reclaiming yourself. All of you. Even the messy parts, especially the messy parts. Because your purpose isn't to become someone else. Your purpose is to become whole. And wholeness only happens when you stop dividing yourself into good and bad, worthy and unworthy, lovable and unlovable. When you finally say, this is me, all of it, that's when transformation begins. That's when your true path begins to unfold. Not because someone told you what it should be, but because you remembered what it always was. And so, this journey we're about to take, through Jungian philosophy, shadow integration, and self-reclamation, isn't just intellectual. It's emotional, it's spiritual, it's cellular. And it starts right here, not in the light, but in the dark. You don't meet your shadow by chance. You meet it when the mask breaks. When the things that once worked, people-pleasing, overachieving, perfectionism, suddenly stop working. You meet your shadow the moment life stops rewarding the persona. That's when the breakdown begins. But Jung teaches us it's not just a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. The pain that cracks your identity, that's the shadow knocking. The job that burns you out, that's your unlived life demanding air. The relationship that drained you, that's your unhealed wounds replaying themselves. It all has meaning, but only if you're willing to look underneath. And that's what Jung calls shadow work. Shadow work isn't some mystical, abstract idea. It's painfully real. It looks like owning the jealousy you feel when someone else succeeds, because it points to parts of you haven't honored yet. It looks like admitting that your niceness isn't always kindness. It's sometimes fear. A fear of being rejected, unloved, or cast out. It looks like recognizing that your endless giving might actually be a strategy to avoid abandonment. We all have patterns we inherited from childhood, culture, trauma. We learned what was acceptable, what was loved, and what needed to be buried. So we buried it. We buried anger because anger made us bad. We buried sadness because sadness made us weak. We buried desire because desire made us selfish. And over time, we built an identity that was digestible for the world, but completely disconnected from the soul. And then one day, something breaks. It might look like depression, burnout, a panic attack, a relationship falling apart, a career that suddenly feels empty. Jung would say, this is not the end. This is the invitation. The moment your psyche refuses to keep pretending. The shadow is rising, not to punish you, but to reclaim you. Because you cannot become who you truly are by bypassing who you've been. Let's pause here for a second. Think of the one part of yourself you never talk about, the habit you hide, the impulse you shame, the thought you pretend you don't think. That's your shadow. And the more you resist it, the louder it gets. Because the shadow is like a child. If ignored, it will scream. If judged, it will withdraw. But if you sit with it, really sit, it will begin to tell you everything. It will show you the stories that shaped you. It will whisper the dreams you buried long ago. It will remind you of the power you handed away. And it will lead you home to yourself. But it won't be comfortable. Jung says, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Because waking up means remembering. It means remembering the times you abandoned your own needs to be loved. The times you swallowed your truth to avoid conflict. The times you chose silence when your soul was begging you to speak. This is not a call for blame. It's a call for responsibility. You are not at fault for the wounds you carry, but you are responsible for the healing. No one can do it for you. You must be willing to meet yourself in the dark, to ask, why do I feel this way? What am I not saying? What part of me have I disowned? This is the beginning of shadow integration, and integration is not erasure. It's not about fixing the bad parts of you. It's about realizing they were never bad to begin with. The anger, it's your boundary system trying to protect you. The sadness, it's your body grieving unmet needs. The shame, it's the story you were told, not the truth of who you are. When you begin to see your shadow clearly, something magical happens. You stop over-identifying with it. You stop being your anger or your fear. Instead, you witness it. And in that witnessing, you reclaim power. You realize that every dark impulse holds light. That every rejected part is a gatekeeper to a deeper truth. That the very thing you've been hiding might be your hidden genius. The artist you shut down. The leader you suppressed. The lover you were told not to be. Jung calls this process individuation, becoming who you were always meant to be. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness requires you to walk through your own shadows, not to defeat them, but to understand them. Because every shadow has a story. Every shadow has a wound. And every wound, when honored, becomes a doorway to purpose. Because here's the truth Jung wanted us to understand. Your purpose is not a title. It's not a role. It's not something you find. It's something you uncover. It's already in you. It lives in your pain. It lives in your patterns. It lives in the fire you've walked through and the truths you've survived. You were not meant to be a replica. You were meant to be a revelation. But that revelation only comes when you're willing to stop performing and start being. And to truly be, you must know all of who you are, not just a curated version, not just the light, but the dark, the forgotten, the raw, the real. That's where the gold is. That's where your purpose starts to breathe. And that's the journey we'll continue walking together. Into the shadow, into the truth, into the calling that's been waiting for you all along. There's a reason certain people trigger you. It's not because they're wrong. And it's not always because they're toxic. Sometimes it's because they are mirrors. Carl Jung called this projection, the psychological phenomenon where we attribute to others the qualities we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. In other words, the parts of yourself you've exiled show up in other people. You deny your anger, and suddenly everyone around you seems aggressive. You suppress your ambition, and suddenly others seem arrogant or too much. You dissound your sexuality, and others feel inappropriate or unsafe. But what if it's not about them? What if your trigger is a treasure map? What if it's pointing you back to the part of yourself that you've been unwilling to claim? Because here's the thing, we attract people not just to love us, but to reflect us. Relationships, especially the most difficult ones, are sacred arenas for shadow work. You will meet your wounds there. You will meet your unmet needs. You will meet the younger versions of you that never got to speak. That's why love can feel so intense. It activates the unconscious. It wakes up the parts of you that were dormant. It forces your patterns into the light. Ever wonder why you keep attracting the same kind of partner, friend, or boss? That's your shadow reenacting its own story. Not because you're broken, but because your psyche wants resolution. It wants you to see what you couldn't see before. So let's get specific. You're in a relationship and you feel unseen. Ask yourself, when did I first feel unseen? Where did I learn to silence myself to keep peace? You constantly overextend yourself to avoid conflict. Ask, where did I learn that my worth is tied to being agreeable? You feel rage towards someone who hurt you. Ask, what boundary did I abandon in order to be loved? Shadow work in relationships is not about blame. It's about ownership. Ownership of your reactions, your history, your unconscious choices. This is not easy work. It takes radical honesty. It's much more comfortable to point the finger outward. But transformation begins when you turn the gaze inward. Because when you face your own shadow, two things happen. First, you stop expecting others to complete you. Second, you begin to attract people who can meet you in your wholeness. Jung believed that only when we integrate the shadow do we become capable of real love. Why? Because otherwise, we don't relate to others. We relate to our projections on others. We're not loving the person. We're loving the fantasy. Or worse, we're fighting the ghost of our past through them. But when we do shadow work, we become sovereign. We stop outsourcing our power. We stop looking for someone to save us. We stop trying to fix others as a distraction from healing ourselves. And suddenly, relationships become a path to awakening. Every argument becomes an invitation. Every heartbreak becomes a revelation. Every trigger becomes a teacher. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start asking, what part of me is being revealed? This shift is profound. Because instead of being a victim of your emotional life, you become the alchemist of it. You begin to mine the gold from every interaction. And in that gold, you start to hear your calling more clearly. You realize that your wounds were distractions from your purpose. They were preparation for it. Think about it. The person who was abandoned becomes the healer of abandonment. The one who felt voiceless becomes the speaker of hard truths. The one who carried shame becomes the mirror that helps others release their own. The pain you've survived has shaped your perception, your compassion, your insight. It has given you a unique lens on the world. And through that lens, you begin to see your purpose, not as something you chase, but as something that emerges when you stop running from yourself, when you stop editing who you are to fit someone else's comfort zone, when you stop playing roles and start living truth. Here's a radical thought. Maybe the most powerful thing you can do for your purpose is heal your relationships, not by fixing anyone else, but by noticing what they reflect. What if your life purpose isn't out there? What if it's in every argument you've avoided, every pattern you keep repeating, every moment you feel pulled toward or away from someone? What if your purpose is hiding in plain sight, in the way you love, lose, forgive, or fight? Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Let that land. Because the people who challenge you most, they may be delivering you straight to your purpose. They are the ones who reveal where you still need to reclaim yourself, to say what you never said, to draw the line you were never taught to draw, to finally choose yourself. This is not soft work. This is soul work. And it will break you open, but in the best way. Because on the other side of all this self-awareness, there's something incredible. Freedom. The freedom to be seen fully, to love without fear, to create without shame, to walk in your purpose, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. You begin to realize your calling isn't a career. It's a consciousness. It's how you show up, how you speak, how you heal, how you respond to your shadow with presence instead of panic. And as you do that, people feel it. You stop being just a personality. You become a presence. Not perfect, but whole. And that wholeness, that's what changes lives. That's what Jung meant when he talked about individuation, not becoming the best version of yourself, but the truest version. One that no longer hides, no longer splits, no longer fragments itself for approval. You were never meant to be half alive. You were meant to walk in the full truth of who you are. Even the messy parts, especially the messy parts. That's where your gold is. That's where your calling is. That's where your life begins. You don't need to find creativity. You need to free it. And the prison it's in, that's your shadow. Carl Jung understood that the unconscious isn't just a place of darkness. It's also a source of incredible imagination, insight, and transformation. When you repress parts of yourself, you're not just silencing fear or anger. You're silencing ideas. You're silencing your inner voice. You're silencing the truth that wants to be spoken through you. Your shadow is where your genius lives. But most of us were taught to censor that genius, to filter it, to make it palatable. We were taught to follow templates, to color inside the lines, to keep our real thoughts to ourselves. But creativity doesn't live inside the lines. It lives in the wild, in the strange, in the honest. You were never meant to just repeat what's already been said. You were meant to reveal something. And what you reveal, when you do shadow work, is raw and powerful and unforgettable, because it comes from a place that's real. Jung believed that when we don't express the unconscious, it expresses itself through symptoms, anxiety, dysfunction, or sudden outbursts of inspiration. It leaks out in your writing, your voice, your dreams, your moods. That's why some of the greatest art, literature, and inventions were born from pain. Because pain cracks open the surface self and lets the soul speak. You can see this in every revolutionary artist, thinker, and creator. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint flowers, she painted her suffering. Kurt Cobain didn't just write lyrics, he poured out his existential angst. Virginia Woolf didn't just craft stories, she gave language to the mental landscape we're taught to hide. What made them powerful wasn't perfection, it was truth. They told the truth no one else was willing to say. And that truth came from their shadow. But this isn't just about artists. This is about you. You don't have to be a painter, writer, or musician. You just have to be human. Because creativity isn't about the medium. It's about the message. It's about allowing your inner world to move through you. when you speak your story, when you teach from your scars, when you share what scares you, you are doing the most creative act possible. You are turning pain into purpose. That's alchemy. That's Jungian integration. It's when the part of you that once felt like a curse becomes a gift, but only if you stop hiding it. This is why the shadow must be explored, not just for healing, but for expression. Because your voice has depth. Your vision has meaning. Your experience is not an accident. It's material. It's source code. It's what makes your contribution unlike anyone else's. But you have to trust it. Even when it feels weird. Even when it feels too much. Even when no one claps for it. Especially then. Because the world doesn't need more polished performances. It needs more truth tellers. People who are willing to write the book that scares them. To speak the words that shake them. To share the ideas that once felt like secrets. That's when purpose emerges. Not from formulas, but from facing what's been waiting to be said. And sometimes, that's not you about words. Sometimes, it's the business you start that no one understands. Sometimes, it's the stand you take when everyone stays silent. Sometimes, it's the quiet way you don't follow the rules anymore. That's creativity too. It's creation from the inside out. But if you're disconnected from your shadow, that creativity gets strangled. You become afraid of judgment. Afraid of failure. Afraid of not being good enough. But those fears aren't truth. They're residue. Leftover echoes from a time you weren't safe to be yourself. And now you have to reclaim that safety from within. You have to tell yourself, my truth is worth speaking. My story is worth honoring. My way is worth following. Even if it's messy. Even if it's unfinished. Even if it's uncomfortable. Because creativity doesn't bloom in control. It blooms in courage, and courage is born in the shadow. So ask yourself, what part of me am I afraid to show? What have I always wanted to say, but never did? What's the thing I'd create if I wasn't scared of rejection? That's your shadow calling. And if you follow it, not blindly, but consciously, you will begin to meet your purpose. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And with each piece you integrate, you become more alive, more clear, more magnetic. You begin to create from wholeness. And that kind of creation doesn't just entertain. It transforms, because it's not made to impress. It's made to liberate you and everyone who receives it. And that's what Carl Jung knew all along, that the shadow isn't just a place of darkness. It's a womb. A sacred container of your most vital truths. And when you go there and you create from there, you don't just find purpose. You become it. We think of the shadow as the opposite of the divine. But what if it's the doorway? Carl Jung didn't believe that spirituality was about avoiding darkness. He believed it was about integrating it. He once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That is the essence of shadow work. It's not about being positive all the time. It's about being whole. It's not about bypassing pain in the name of peace. It's about facing pain so deeply that peace finally becomes possible. There's something profoundly spiritual about that. Because when you meet your shadow with love, when you stop demonizing it, you begin to feel a strange paradox. The darkness within you is not separate from the light. It contains it, just like night contains the stars. And once you realize that, you stop fighting yourself. You stop running from your past. You stop trying to spiritually fix what was never broken, only buried. And what emerges? Clarity. Compassion. A sense of being connected to something greater than your ego. Because that's what the ego does. It divides. It says, this part of me is good, that part is bad. This thought is spiritual, that one is sinful. This emotion is safe, that one is shameful. But the soul doesn't speak in binaries. It speaks in truth. And the truth is, you are all of it. You are the calm and the chaos, the giver and the griever, the saint and the survivor. And when you stop rejecting half of who you are, you start to experience something deeper than happiness. You start to experience wholeness. And wholeness is the real path to purpose. because you can't fulfill your calling if you're busy hiding from yourself. You can't walk in alignment with your soul if you're ashamed of its wounds. You can't offer light to others if you haven't made peace with your own dark nights. So here's the spiritual question Jung might ask. Can you sit with your shadow long enough to hear what it's teaching you? Can you hold your anger without being consumed by it? Can you listen to your fear without letting it dictate your choices? Can you meet your envy, your grief, your lust, your pride, not to indulge them, but to understand them? That's spiritual maturity. That's the alchemy of the soul. Because what you don't transform, you transmit. And until you bring the unconscious into the light, it will run your life and you'll call it fate. But when you make the darkness conscious, you don't just shift your mindset. You shift your entire frequency. You begin to attract different people. You notice different patterns. You live with a different energy. Not because you're pretending to be someone else, but because you've remembered who you are beneath the fear. This is where your connection to the divine begins. Not in the heavens, but in depths. In the moment you stop performing and start listening. In the moment you realize that your shadow is not a curse, it's a companion, a guide, a guardian, a keeper of the keys to your inner temple. And in that temple, you don't need to be perfect. You need to be present. Present with your humanity, present with your history, present with the sacred wisdom you carry, simply because you've survived. This is why Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Because when you do that, not just mentally but spiritually, you return to something ancient. You return to the source. You stop chasing purpose like it's a destination. You embody it because it was never outside of you. It was always inside the part of you we're taught to hide. And when you reclaim that, your presence changes rooms. Your voice carries weight. Your path becomes clear. Not because the world gives you permission, but because you've stopped waiting for it. You are no longer looking for a sign from above. You've learned to read the signs within. Your anxiety, a signal. Your resistance, a lesson. Your recurring dreams and symbols, a language. Jung devoted his life to decoding this language, to showing us that the unconscious isn't a scary abyss. It's a map to the soul. And if you learn to read that map, your life stops being random. It becomes a revelation. A process of remembering what you've always known. Beneath the noise, beneath the conditioning, beneath the performance. You are not here to be small. You are not here to be safe. You are here to wake up, to integrate, to create, to serve not from perfection, but from authenticity. This is the invitation of shadow work, not just to heal, but to come home. Home to yourself, home to your calling, home to the divine intelligence that lives inside every part of you, even the ones you judge most, especially those. Because when you embrace your shadow, you don't just discover your purpose, you become it. And nothing, not fear, not doubt, not even the past, can take that away. When you begin to integrate your shadow, something surprising happens. You start to see the shadows of the world more clearly too. Not with judgment, but with awareness. Because just as individuals repress what they're afraid to face, so does society. Carl Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, the vast inherited reservoir of memory, myth, fear, and instinct that connects all of humanity. And just as you have a personal shadow, there is a collective shadow, a cultural shadow, a national shadow, a global shadow. You see it in racism, in war, in greed, in oppression. You see it in the ways we divide ourselves, by race, by class, by gender, by belief. You see it in the denial of suffering, in the addiction to convenience, in the glorification of violence or control. And here's the hard truth. Much of what we see out there is a reflection of what we haven't healed in here. We live in a world where it's easier to project blame than to face pain, where outrage is more comfortable than introspection, where performance is more celebrated than authenticity. But when you start doing your shadow work, you begin to feel the cost of that avoidance. You realize that every time we ignore our own discomfort, we contribute to the systems that perpetuate suffering. Because society is not a separate thing. Society is us. It's a collection of individual shadows projected outward and reinforced until they become norms. But here's the good news. When you heal yourself, you interrupt that pattern. You stop passing down shame. You stop reenacting trauma. You stop enabling injustice through unconscious compliance. And instead, you become a light in the dark. Not because you've erased your shadow, but because you've owned it. That's real power. That's what Jung meant when he talked about individuation, not isolation, but integration. A person who is individuated doesn't need to dominate others. They don't need to prove their worth. They don't need to scapegoat, control, or deceive, because they are at peace with themselves. And someone who is at peace with themselves brings peace wherever they go. That's how shadow work becomes world work. It's not about retreating from the world. It's about showing up differently in it. It's about creating systems that reflect inner wholeness, not inner fragmentation. Imagine a world where leaders have done shadow work, where parents don't pass down unresolved wounds, where corporations are run not by greed, but by purpose, where educators teach emotional literacy, not just facts, where justice doesn't mean punishment, but restoration. That's not a fantasy. It's a possibility. But it begins with you, with your willingness to look inward, with your courage to disrupt generational patterns, with your choice to be conscious in a world that rewards unconsciousness. This doesn't mean being perfect. It means being aware. It means pausing before reacting. It means choosing empathy over ego. It means recognizing that every judgment you make about someone else might be a clue about something inside yourself that's asking to be seen. It means asking the bigger questions. What does my fear say about the world I've inherited? What does my anger say about the boundaries I've never learned to set? What does my sadness say about the connection I've lost, both with others and with my own spirit? And then using those answers not just to self-soothe, but to serve. Because your shadow isn't just a personal burden. It's a collective opportunity. It's the raw material for revolution. The more you integrate it, the more your life becomes a living medicine for you and for others. This is the kind of leadership the world is starving for. Not the loudest voice, the most honest one. Not the most polished persona, the most present human. And that begins with being honest about your shadow. Not hiding it, not glamorizing it, not weaponizing it, just owning it. And then moving forward, one choice, one breath, one conversation at a time. This is how you change the world. You do the work no one sees, so you can become someone who sees everything differently. You create ripples through your relationships, your art, your career, your community. And eventually, those ripples become waves. Waves of awakening, waves of healing, waves of transformation. Jung understood that the psyche of humanity must evolve if we are to survive. And that evolution doesn't happen in government buildings or corporate boardrooms first. It happens in living rooms, in therapy rooms, in classrooms, in hearts, in the quiet moments when someone finally decides, I will not repeat what harmed me. I will not hide who I am. I will not project my pain. I will transform it. That's how the collective shadow begins to heal. Not all at once, not through force, but through consciousness, your consciousness. Because your purpose isn't just about your success. It's about your impact. And the more you integrate your shadow, the more powerful that impact becomes. You don't need a dramatic awakening to find your purpose. You need daily devotion to truth, to self-awareness, to the quiet work of integration that no one claps for, but that changes everything. Carl Jung's philosophy wasn't about overnight transformation. It was about lifetime evolution. And that evolution happens one decision at a time. Every time you choose to pause instead of react, you're integrating. Every time you ask, what's really going on inside me, you're evolving. Every time you make space for the parts of yourself you used to deny, you're getting closer to your soul. Because the shadow doesn't disappear after one breakthrough. It walks with you. It's not an enemy you conquer, it's a companion you learn from. And when you accept that, your entire relationship to life shifts. You stop chasing highs. You stop fearing lows. You start living from a deeper place. A place of response, not reactivity. A place of alignment, not performance. A place of presence, not perfection. You begin to understand that every moment is a mirror. That your job, your relationships, your triggers, your emotions, they're all revealing something to you. Not to punish you, but to invite you. To remember. To release. To return to what's real. This is the essence of a purpose-driven life. Not just one big mission, but a million tiny integrations. Purpose becomes the way you speak to your partner when you're tired. The way you breathe through discomfort instead of numbing it. The way you forgive, not because it's easy, but because it sets you free. It's how you carry yourself when no one is watching. And that's the part most people miss. They want the mountaintop moment, but they forget the mountain is made of steps. Your purpose is not something you stumble into. It's something you build. Shadow by shadow, choice by choice, day by day. And the more you honor that process, the more powerful you become. Not powerful in the egoic sense, powerful in the authentic sense. You walk differently, not with arrogance, but with groundedness. You speak differently, not with performance, but with presence. You love differently, not with control, but with capacity. This is what integration makes possible. A life that feels like you. A life that reflects your wholeness, not just the parts you've been taught to polish. And the most beautiful thing, you don't need to do it all at once. You just need to stay in the work. To wake up each day and ask, where am I still hiding? What am I afraid to feel? What would it look like to meet that fear with compassion today? That's the path. It's not always glamorous, but it's real. And real is what changes you. Real is what calls in your tribe, your people, those who see you not because you wear a mask, but because you've taken it off. This is where soul-aligned relationships come from.